This is Gemara Nazir Daf Nun Beis, and we pick it up in the bottom of Nun Aleph Amid Beis, a few lines from the bottom, Ba'i Rava, and we're really in the midst of a very heavy Tumah Sugya, figuring out at what point something imparts Tumah. What does that have to do with Nazir? Because the halach is a Nazir cannot become Tameh, and if he does, he needs to be due tiglachas, he needs to shave his head, bring the karbanos, and start all over again. So yesterday, the entire daf basically was what fills the halach of rekev, the halach of a ladle full of corpse dust. Today, we're going to continue with the halachas of Tamah, but now we're going to take a little bit of a left turn. Ba'i Rava, let's see. Nimala, an ant shechasra mahu, an ant that is lacking, an ant that is missing a limb, a very small limb, but it's missing a limb. Mahu, what is the halacha? What's the question? If someone eats this ant, in general, even though, in general, you have to eat a certain quantity of a forbidden substance to be chayim malchus. But the one caveat is, if one eats a beria, a complete entity, then right away he's chayim malchus. The question is, an ant that is living, but it's missing a leg, is that called a beria with regard to this halacha that if someone eats this ant, he's going to get malchus or not? And the Gemara explains the two sides of the coin. Shiura gamirin la v'achaser. Is there a shear? What is the shear? The shear is an incomplete creature, a beria shalem, and this isn't. It's missing a leg. Oy beria gamirila, or does it have to be a beria, a creature? And this is a living creature, in as much as it's missing a leg, but it's still living. Ve'oika, and therefore it's going to be considered a beria, and he will be chayim malchus. So the Gemara asks a fundamental question: when is there malchus? Upon consuming an ant that is missing a limb. And with that, we turn over to Nun Beis Amid Aleph. Amar Rav Yehuda diskarta. Says Rav Yehuda from a place called Diskarta. Tashema. Let's bring a raya. Says in the Torah, Bahem, with regard to Shratim, the Torah says, with them, Yachol Bekulan, you would think that there's only Tama if you touch Kulam, an entire entity, Tamalam or Mayhem from them. Mayhem Yachol Miksasam, that there's even Tama if you touch part of them. Tamalam or Bahem. No, it has to be in the whole. So what do? We have these two halves of the coin. Ha-ketzad, what's the case? Achegiga b'miksasan. The case is until you touch part of a carcass, shehu kikulan, which is considered like an entire entity. So when you touch a dead item, which is like an entire entity, that is when there is toma. That's the Bahem Mayhem, a complete entity, but part of an entity. So that's a Yigabi Miksasam, which is similar to Kulam. What is that? 4 lines down. And the Chazal said this is the size of an adasha, of a lentil. Why? Because the chaymet, which is a type of ant, is now referring to a nose. It's the type of ant that's mentioned in Vayikra. That it's a type of a snail or something like that, a type of lizard. The chaymet is the size of an adasha when it is created. So what do we see for this Raisa Shema Mina? Shiura Gemirila. We see that it's a shear. And even if it's missing part of it, once it's considered a complete entity, it's going to give off Tama. Similarly, in our case, he's going to be Chayim Malchus. Amar Rav Shmaya, no raya. Keeping in shura dibidloy avikadasha. No, the only time you need the shear is only when it's not the size of the adasha. Why? Dibidloy avikadasha lo metama. Deloy nafla ba neshama is only when there is no life in it. But when there is life, then it's not the same thing. And therefore, if it has a neshama, then not. And for tibai we're leaving it as a shayla. We don't necessarily have a raya to something that's a living entity. The Bryce is referring to when is there a shear with regard to tama, a dead carcass, a dead sheretz, size of an adasha, and if it's not. But now what says Rav Shemaya, but if it's a living entity, we don't necessarily have a raya, which is our case of the ant missing the leg. And the Gemara leaves it as the Shaila, and we do not know whether there will indeed be Malchus or not. Continues the Gemara at the two dots, Ashidra v'ha-Gulgalis. The Mishnah said that the spinal cord, the Gulgalis, the skull, imparts Tumah, and thereby, if the Nazir touches it, he's chayiv to shave his head and restart his Nazir. So Yibai Lahu asks the Gemara, Shidra the Gulgalis Tanan, Oy Dilma, Oy Shidra, Oy Gulgalis. A fundamental shayla we have all over Shas. Anytime you have two things with a vav, is that vav and or? Ask the Gemara, is it the skull and the spinal cord, or either or is going to impart Tumah? So Amar Rava Tashema, says Rava about 12 lines down. The first word line is Gulgalis. Let's bring a raya. Shidra shegired roiv ilin. If we have a shidra, we have a spinal cord. That was most of the ilin, the ribs. I think it comes to the same word as a leaf. Most of the ribs are severed. Sheba tehaira. What's the halacha? It does not give off tumah anymore. It doesn't have a din of a sheder of a spine, because most of the ribs, are detached. Ubekever, but if it's in the grave, afilu mishuberes, ay mifurekas tameya. Even if the ribs are broken, even if the ribs are removed, it's still going to give off tameh. Why? Mipnei hakever, because of the grave. It's considered one entity because it's inside the grave. So in general, the spinal cord, when the ribs are cracked off, does not give off tumah. But if it's in the grave, then it does. Says the Gemara, Taima mishom de gireid. What do we see? That the reason why the sheder, the spine, does not give off tumah is because the ribs are cracked off. Halo gireid tameh. If the ribs were not cracked off, the clear implication is the sheder, the shidra, the spine by itself. What do you ask give off tumah? Shema mina, oy shidra, oy gulgalos katani. What do we see is a raya. It's either or, because the shedra by itself is giving off tama. Answers the Gemara, no raya. Ha loy katani, it didn't say this. Ha kamashblan, you know what the chiddush is? Chigirei tahira. That when they're cracked off, then we know it's tar. But when they're on, we don't necessarily have a raya that's tami idach tabayilacha. If the ribs are still left on, that is a shaila. So it's only a raya one way from this brisa that once the ribs are cracked off, it's no longer tame. But we do not have a raya, says the Gemara, that if the ribs are still there, once the ribs are cracked off, it's tar. We don't have a raya that if the ribs are cracked off, that it's going to be tame. So Tashema, the Gemara tries to bring another raya. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, says Rabbi Yehuda, Shisha Devarim Rabbi Akiva Mitame, 6 things. Rabbi Akiva was Mitame and the Chachamim Mitaharin. A debate between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim. V'chazer by Rabbi Akiva was Chayzer, Umaisa Shevia. So again, 6 things. Rabbi Akiva says Tameh, Chacham say Tar. Subsequently, Rabbi Akiva folded and said, I hold like you the Chachamim that it's Tar. Now, to make it nasty, there was a story they brought a box of bones into the shul shel Tarsiim. It was a box of bones into the shul of the Tarsiim, the coppersmiths. And it left it out in the open here. V'nichnas tudis haroifei, v'chol haroifei mimai, and tudis the roifei, and all the roifim entered. V'amru ein kan shidra mimeisech, and they examined the bones. The doctors know, and they said in this box is not the complete sheder spine of one mace, and therefore everyone is tar. What's the implication? Time with the like a sheder de michada haika. But if there was one full sheder of one person, ay sheldra ay gilgalais. But therefore we have a raya that if there was one, time with like a sheder de michada haika. But if there was a sheder gilgalais de michada, then Nazir megalech alei shema minos. We have a raya ay sheldra ay gilgalais de nan. A beautiful raya, because the doctors 2 days clearly said here is not the sheder of one person, clearly implying if it was, it would give off tama. Says the Gemara, 10 lines to the bottom, the first one line is loy. Says the Gemara again, loy mi bayi ka'amar. No, Tudis was saying an extra chiddush. Loy mi bayi, it's pashit, that in this case, There's certainly not the sheder and the skull, the spine and the skull of one mace. But to this was saying, there's not even the spine or the skull of one mace. But in reality, maybe really what you need is both, and therefore we do not have a rayo. Sorry about that. That's 2 times in a row that we have the alarm going off. We have to fix that. Tashima. Says the Gemara, 6 lines from the bottom. Let's bring another ayah. Meiminyana. Says the Braisa within this machlekes Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim. Meiminyana, from the 6 items that were listed that Rabbi Akiva and the Chacham debated. What were the 6 things? Minyana, from that which was enumerated. What were these 6 entities that originally Rabbi Akiva was mitame and the Chacham were mitaher? Alever min abeis sheba mishnei meisim. A limb of a mace that comes from 2 meisim. Alever min achai sheba mishnei minei adam. A limb of a living person that comes from 2 people. V'achati kavatama is half a kav of bone sheba mishnei meisim that comes from 2 people. V'aravi is dam abba mishnayim. The quarter a revius of dam, quarter lug of blood that comes from 2 people. V'aletzim kisayra, bone like a sa'ira, like a lentil. A barley, shenach l'shem, which is split in half. V'hashidra v'hagil galois. So says the Gemara as we turn over to Nbeizim and Beis, commenting on this list. How many items did Rabbi Akiva say he argued with the Chachamim? 6. But now anyone who goes back and anyone that counts, you're going to see an issue. If Shidra and Gilgalos are 2 different entities, you know how many you have? You have 7. V'is al kedaitach, says the Gemara in the top line of Beis and Beis. If you're going to tell me Shidra and Gilgalos, Hani Shevian Havon, then you have 7. So it must be, it's not either or. It's a raya that it needs to be sheder and Gilgalai, spine and skull to be mitame. Answers the Gemara, nothing doing. Kikatani, what was listed in this Braisa, the 6 entities, Kolechel de Pligali Rabim. These are the 6 times that the Rabbim, the Chacham, argue in Rabbi Akiva, which is Lafuke Etzim Kisayra, meaning, you're right, there's 7, because each one is separate, the skull and the spinal cord. But remove the case of the etzem, the bone like a barley, because only one person argues on that case. Tanya, etzem kisayra shenech l'shnayim Rav Akiva mitamei, v'Rav Yochanan ben Nuri mitayer. So it's not a case that the Chachamim disagree, and therefore it's not included in the 6. I was listed. It's not one of the 6. If we don't have a raya that Sheder and Gilgalos are 1, they can each be their own Toma. Iba Yisema, Teretz number 2 says the Gemara, Kikatani Ever min Ameis, Ever min Achai Loikatani. That the Braisa, even though it listed both, that's an inaccurate reading of the Braisa. It's only Ever min Ameis and not Ever min Achai. Answer number 3, 7 lines down. Iba Yisem Kikatani Kolecha the Nazir Megaleach al Ahiloi. The Braisa is listing the entities that the Nazir is going to have to shave if he's under the same roof. Lafuke asked him, Kisayra, the case of the bone, like the barley, Deloy, which doesn't have a Tomas oil. Viba Yisema, Teretz number 4. Kikatani, the Braisa listed, Kolecha the Hadar Bay, all the cases of Rav Akiva eventually was Chayzer and was agreed to the Chacham that's Tahar. Lafuke Viestam, the Hadar Bay, was not Chayzer. Da'amalei Rabbi Labar, Kapara, Lo Tishta Rav Viestam, Bechazara. Why? Shari Lemudish Rav Akiva, Biyad Rav Akiva was not Chayzer. And the pasuk is a raya to Rav Akiva, kol nafshes meis lo yavoy, and any dead bodies he should not come. And from here Rav Akiva learns out that blood from 2 people does transmit tumah. Therefore he was not chayzer in this case to agree with the Chachamim that it's tar. Rav Shimon Oimer, and Rav Shimon comments on this last din of the blood of the dam from 2 mesim, ad yamav haya mitame. During his lifetime, Rav Akiva was mitame when we had a quarter of blood, a revius of dam from 2 mesim. Says Rav Shimon, when Rav Akiva was alive, he stuck to his guns with this halacha. When he died, I can't tell you what happened. Tana says the Gemara, the Braisa, Hoshchu Shina Neitani Yoisav. Rav Shimon sees blackened because of all the fast in which he spoke disrespectfully of Rav Akiva. He subsequently fasted. Because how could he say that only in his lifetime Rav Akiva held what he held and not in his death? So Rav Shimon felt it was an inappropriate way of talking with his Rebbe Rav Akiva, and the rest of his life Rav Shimon fasted. So says the Gemara, we don't have a raya. Is the sheder and Golgala, the spine and the skull, is it only metame together or each on its own? Tashema, the Gemara tries again. The Tanya learned in a Braisa. Beishamei oimrim, roivat samois mina atzamim, a quarter kav of bones will give off tama mina atzamim from many bones, oy mishnayim, oy mishloisha, even from 2 or 3 bones. That's Beishamai. Beisilahim roiva min hagviyah. You have to have a quarter kav from the gviyah, from the majority of the body. Meiroiv binyan, or meiroiv aminyan, which either is the majority of the skeletal frame, the binyan, or the roiv minyan, the majority of the number of bones in the body. And on this machlokes Beishamai Beisila, at what point the roiva atzamais, the quarter kav of bones, gives off Tomam? Rav Yeshua Yachalani Lasos Divrei Beishamai v'Divrei Beisilel ke'echad. Says Rabbi Yeshua, I can learn that Beishamai and Beisilel are learning one thing. Shebeishamai Yomim Mishnayim Yomim Shloisha. Beishamai learned it could come from 2 or 3 bones. Oy Mishnei Shukayim v'Yerech Echad. What did Beishamai mean? He said 2 bones. What's 2 bones? Either Shnei Shukayim, the 2 shin bones, v'yerech echad, 1 thigh, or Mishnei Yerechayim v'shoik echad, or 2 Yerechayim, the 2 thigh bones, and 1 shin bone. And if Beishamai meant that when he said 2 or 3, that's going to be the majority of the height of a person, mi goiva, from the height of a man. And Beisilel says, min hagaviyah, and Beis Hillel says the majority of the frame. What does that mean? The majority of the binyan, of the frame itself, or the minyan. Meaning Beis Shammai is saying the same thing. They're talking about 2 different parts of the body. Beis Shammai was talking about the thighs and the shin bones, and therefore you get the majority of the body that way. Beis Hillel was talking about the hands and the feet, which are many more bones, smaller, and joints. So that's what Beis Shammai says. So Shammai yoimer afilu etzem min hashidra min hagolgalois. Continues of Yeshua. Continues the Braisa. Shammai says even a single bone from the spine or from the skull. And therefore, what do we see? Seemingly, that Beis Shammai is commenting that when we have even 1 bone of the skull or 1 bone of the spinal column, it's going to give off Toma. And seemingly on this detail, Beis Hillel disagrees. So what do we see? We seemingly have a raya from this Braisa. The Beis Shammai says, I said that incorrectly, that 1 bone of the spine or 1 bone of the skull. And what are the others going to argue? Not 1 bone of the spine or the skull, the entire spine or skull. But seemingly this Braisa is a raya that it's either the spine or the skull that's going to give off Toma. Says the Gemara, no raya. Shiny Shammai de Machmir. Shammai is different, he's Machmir, and therefore the fact that Shammai holds 1 bone from the spine of the skull doesn't necessarily mean that those who argue hold all the bones of the spine or the skull. Maybe they hold of both. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Liv Shamina, let's prove from here. Time de Beis Shammai de Machmir. Harabanan adika shidra vigilgalais. But maybe the Rabbanon, the opposite, you need to have both. Meaning, Hagufa, Beis Shammai is Machmir. So 1 bone of the spine, 1 bone of the skull will be Matame. The Chachamim argue, they go the opposite extreme. All the bones of the spine and the skull. Adika Shidra Vigul Golis. You need both. Says the Gemara, lo, no raya. I'd come lobli Rabban Ali de Shammai. Elabet Samecha with 1 bone, dasim in a shidra min a golgolis. Avlecha dise beinei afilu chada min hoin. But maybe it's a dichoy. We don't know. Maybe once you have the entire thing, either the spine or the skull. We don't have a raya either way. And the Gemara again does not push the shayla and leaves this as a shayla. What exactly will give off tumah, the spine or the skull? We'll pick it up from the shayla of Rabbi Racham the next year. B'siyata d'shmaya.